layers on this? No. Some of the questions they also ask me, can I use copyrighted material? No. No photographs, no copyrighted material. Which means, can you make a comic book about Mario? No. Now, satire is another story. That's how Scary Movie, Not Another Teen Movie, all those, that's how they get away with it. They satirize comic books. So somebody mentioned, like, Spider-Man. Instead of Spider-Man, it would be like Lizard Man. I don't know. Whatever. Or what's another insect? Bee-Man. Whatever. Okay? That's fine. You can still have the same idea. There is not too many originally new stories, especially for a 2-page front and back comic book, right? You're going to basically use the old adage, like a fat dog or trying to get through a skinny doggy door, let hilarity ensue. Go. You know, you're going to keep it very, very simple. So make sure you do that. So those are two. And photographs, can you take your photograph and can you just live trace it? What is that? We'll talk about it in a few seconds. No, you can't. I want you to draw this stuff. I want you to make it your own. Can you take photographs and then somebody physically trace on top of them to get the proportion of the characters and somebody else cartoon those proportions slightly? Absolutely. They do that in Disney. That's, you know, that's fine. But I don't want to see, like, I went to Photo Filter and I put a posterize effect on my face and then I put it in my Photoshop file. There's my comic. That's not going to be good, okay? So, what if there are ways to get your images into the computer using Illustrator and Photoshop? There are. If you're very good at sketching, we're going to start with Photoshop, and I'm going to grab a bunch of images. This first way is dependent on how you do sketch. And I sketch the bad way, so I always break this rule. Who sketches where their hand gets all dirty on the side? All of us. Yeah, there you go. You're smudging the paper up. It's looking like crap. The drawing may look great, but the paper itself is not too great. Well, when I go to scan it in, I get all that blood, the smudginess, right? Now, a simple adjustment, or levels adjustment, I should say, will get rid of that, and I'll show you that. But what if I want to just utilize the line work? Well, my suggestion, before we scan this, and I'll show you something, is to take your drawing, draw it the messy way, get another piece of paper, trace over that drawing as clean as possible. Use thick, not thick, it could be thick or thin. I mean, line quality is obviously important. But use black pens or markers to trace over it. Don't worry too much about shading and highlighting. Just get the outline. Make sense? The nice outline. So what would that picture look like? Well, we're going to use, the first thing I want to do is I want to check my tonal range. I talk a lot about that when I grade you guys. Tonal range. Okay? That means value, tone, all that fun stuff. If I had smudges, I would take this image and I would say image, adjustments, levels. Guess what? I can do whatever I want destructively because I'm not looking at your layers, right? And I would darken it. Do you see the difference? Can everyone see that? There's a difference. But breaking point, that's where it was, that's where I took it. So I get it as close to pure black and pure white as possible. That's step one, okay, for this method. Now I want to remove my white background. Now there are many ways to remove or select things. We know some ways. One is the magic wand tool, right? Get back to the magic wand tool. I can do this, and I can be like, yep, I know what I'm doing. Look at that. How awesome is that? That's fine. That doesn't necessarily mean it will look bad. The way I was taught, and I have a lot of friends who are professional illustrators, some of my colleagues, and they make, my one friend, Victor, he's a graphic design professor here. He does like children's books, posters for the Orlando Youth Rep Theater. He does Ruby Tuesdays, kids menus. So he needs to do a ton of work really, really quickly. That's what you guys want to do. A ton of great looking work really fast. So this is a method he taught me a few years ago, and I think it's awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a select all. I'm going to then edit, copy. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to my channels layer. Now channels, you remember from our brightness and contrast, our what's it called, displacement map lecture, right? we dealt with the channels and the contrast of those channels. In this case, what I want to do is I want to make a new channel, which gives me something called alpha 1. Alpha channels, normally for other programs, if you eventually go and use Maya 3D or programs, they deal with transparency. Now in our case, what I want to do is take that image I've copied. Remember, I have that image loaded on my clipboard, don't I? And I want to paste it in alpha 1. I pasted it by hitting Command V, as in Victor. That's why they named it after him. So we have that one. Now, you're probably going, okay, what's the point? It looks exactly the same. At this point, there are no magical keys that's just my mask layer. There we go. It's still, the image looks absolutely the same. What I'm going to do now, though, is if I hover over that alpha 1, and I hold my command key down, and I click in it, what does it do? It selects the black. Now this only works if you have extreme black and extreme white. If you have gray values, I can't guarantee it's going to work for you. Now, I could have used select color range as well. This way, it just seemingly works better for me. Doesn't mean it's right, or the best way, it's just what I do. So I'm going to grab that, and I look, and I go, okay, well that's selecting all the areas that are white, if I look at it closely, because I can see this border, right? That means that's selected. So I'm going to do a select inverse. Now what's it selecting? Just the black. You can tell. It's an obvious kind of, you can see it wrapping around. I'm going to go back to my layers, and I'm going to make a new layer, an empty layer. I'm going to reset my color palette down there, and I highlight my empty layer with the selection still active. And remember my fill shortcuts? I could do edit fill, but I did command delete or option delete. You guys remember those? That's how you fill, command delete or option delete. So I'm going to do that. Command D to deselect. And I'm going to take off this. That looks like a pretty easy way to select something, doesn't it? Okay, let's see what would have happened if I did color range. It may still look good. So let's try with color range. Select color range. This with my fussiness. I could also do highlights. Select inverse. This is basically what I did. Go with black. Oh, did that work the same? Helps if I have black in my section. There we go. All right, let's see. Which one's clearer? That's my way. This is color range. Color range work better? Okay, that's color range's way right there. Let me show you my way. My way's a little smoother. I get a little more value structure in there. All right? So, sure, they both work. It's just a matter of, I mean, I'm still going to have to go in here with an eraser, I'm sure, and go, yeah, I don't want that, I don't want that. But color range looks pretty good. That's the other thing, okay? He has a good point. Can I just do this? No. It grabs the whole box out. Isn't that weird? So the other thing is, well, somebody said, well, why don't you just hold Command and click in here? Same thing. You have to pull it into the alpha channel to do it.
Can you just change the blending mode to like screen?
You could, but then you got that white there, and then when you start painting on top of it, or I've isolated this now. Let me show you a reason why I want to do that. Ready? What if I'm doing this drawing? Hit delete on this. Go away. Hit delete on this layer. I'm ready to do this drawing, and I'm going to do a couple of layers. I'm going to do a fill layer, a shadow layer, and a highlight layer. A lot of illustrators, you'll see this. I won't. All right. So, what if I took these layers and I said, you know what, that black line works all right, but what if I do a FX blending mode color overlay? What if I make that blue? Who knows? Somebody says, you can't do that. That's not black line work. Who cares? Right? Isn't that a little more playful? Right? Why not? So I have the ability to do this where blending modes may affect that color in a specific way. So now what I can do is if I want to fill this, I can just simply use my magic wand tool. I'm going to pull these down by one color. Now, I have to be careful. So if I get my magic wand tool and I say, ooh, what is that select? I don't know what that's selecting. Sometimes this works, sometimes this method doesn't. Let's see if this works. Nope. Let's do, yeah, it doesn't like me. Sometimes you can just kind of fill it that way. Or, I do it this is how I do it. Get my brush tool, get Batman. Helps if he has 100% opacity. And I'm going to go, and what is this? Basically, we did this as a kid. It's a coloring book. So if you tell me, we're not really good at filling in color, we don't know how to. It's a coloring book. I made you a coloring book of your sketch. Okay? And I can sit here all day long, and if I mess up, flip my brush, go to my eraser, back that way. Get my brush tool again and fill it in. Or I can command click. We'll do a select inverse here. And I can use the guides that it already has. Right? That helps a little bit. Now I'm not getting a perfect match here. But it's a start when I'm filling it in. Alright? So that's a way, that was really crappy, but that's a way to start with this color. Then, again, I can multiply this. I can still do a blending mode on this. I can get my shadow layer and set that to a darkening mode, low % brush. I can paint shadows. My highlight layer, I'm not painting any direct light source, by the way. I'm breaking the rules of coloring. My highlight layer, I can paint highlights. Does that make sense? It's the elephant technique all over again. I'm just organizing my file. Now, you want to do any of this. You want to, don't paint it that crappy. It looks really bad. We know this is still raster. So what I may do is I may take all my sketches at a high DPI, and I may color them in with my team. I may deal with the line work. I may deal with maybe the bubbles in here, vector, I don't know where, but maybe I do it just like this. And then I shrink them into a predetermined layout, right? Somebody else is drawing all the squares. And then I grab these images and I crop them in nice ways. Make sense? Now I've also isolated my characters from the background. So I can paint my background separately. I can reuse my background, put it into other places. So if I'm using Illustrator, let's get rid of Batman here. Let's grab him again. I'm going to do my, if you're in my online computer art class, this semester, you've seen this guy already. Mickey Mouse, coloring book. A technique to take raster graphics and convert them into vector. It's pretty cool. It's harder to convert a vector graphic, well, it's actually really easy, I should say. Convert a vector graphic into a raster. You save it as a JPEG, you're done, right? Convert over. To convert it back to vector is extremely difficult unless you know some techniques. Now, what I don't want you to see, or do, I should say, is this. So I'm going to save him off real quick. Desktop, Mickey. And I'm going to get a picture of, oh, I thought somebody said something with their hands. Bob Barker. Okay. And let's say Bob Barker, that's a really tiny image. They're always that tiny. His angry. All right, I'm gonna take Bob Barker, and somebody asked me, Matt, can you make Bob Barker vector? Sure. Will it look good? No. Okay, this is called image trace or live trace. Okay, depending on the version of Photoshop you have. I'm gonna turn on my application pane here. There it is. You can see it. And immediately when I place a raster image into Illustrator, it does not, and I can't repeat that enough, does not make it immediately vector. If I save this file, and I save it to a .ai file, Adobe Illustrator file, it is not vector. That is still dependent on pixels, okay? Still resolution dependent, not independent like vector. So up at the top here, I get an image trace option box. Now if I go and do a high fidelity photo on this, it's probably gonna crash my computer. Now it's vector. You're probably going, Matt, you're totally wrong. That looks amazing. Okay? Well, I'm going to expand this. Expanding means I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it into fills and strokes. We all know from the previous lecture on Illustrator, that's what Illustrator is built out of. Lines and shapes. Okay? So I'm going to expand it. So what if I asked you, okay, Bob Barker is vector now, please edit something on him. Can you edit his tie out for me? You're like, I won't do that. I don't want to touch that. Furthermore, even though it's now vector, what do we get? Sure, that may look great on a billboard from miles away, but up close, what it did is it sampled all those colors and converted them. Live trace, this is, who watches the show Once Upon a Time? It's a little more popular every year, and it's usually me and like 20 women who raise their hand. I watch that show, okay? I like that show. It's cheesy, but you know, it gets me through my Sundays after grading. So, you guys know there's a book in Once Upon a Time, their storybook. It is terrible. They live trace all their images. And I'm thinking in my head, this is Disney. They don't have anyone at Disney who can just draw, so they fired them all, that's why. But who can just draw something? Why? So they live trace it. It looks like crap, okay? The majority of artwork done with image trace is this crappy photo trying to pass off like you know what vector is, somebody being lazy, not going through and doing great by Mickey. Mickey Mouse always makes everybody love everything, so. File, place, Mickey Mouse. Oh boy. There it is. All right. I have, notice this is always like, if you ever see a magic trick, they always like prep it ahead of time. You don't see certain things, you know. Notice I'm pointing mine out. I picked an image with extreme white and extreme black. I didn't pick an image with shady hand on it. Make sense? I didn't draw this at all, but I didn't draw this on a piece of notebook paper, did I? Don't draw on notebook paper. How dare you guys? Some people don't even take notes on notebook paper anymore. Don't draw on it, okay? So we have this. I'm going to go to image trace. It's referred to as live trace in CS4 and below. Or I can go to the image trace menu here. I'm going to hit make, but I'm going to actually use a little drop down. I like that one. High fidelity just means high. It's going to run through its process. So let's say you sketched it in, you scanned it in at 600 dpi. You have somebody in your group live tracing this. You just give them your file and say scan it, live trace it, give it to the next person to color. Okay? So here we go. We have this. Pretty cool. Now I have a menu box right here to go to presets. If you know what all this means, play with it. If you don't touch it. Okay? How do I know what that means? You look it up. Okay? I know what it means. I know it has to do with my paths and the method that it's called auto budding, isn't it? Or it's I call it auto budding. That the budding does, that's the curvature of the end of the points. They're not square, they're round. But For the most part, high fidelity, if you're using an extreme black and white photo, should do the trick. The other thing you're going to need, you want to make sure all your shapes are closed. So you see how, look at this umbrella shape, the nub of the umbrella. I don't want any little gaps of white cutting through that. You guys remember MS Paint? Remember how the paint bucket tool would fill things? We're going to do that in here, so we need a complete closed surface. That will make sense in a few seconds. When you're done, step 1 is image trace, high fidelity photo. Step 2, expand. It's right up here. Expand. Not as bad. I still wouldn't want to edit it, but it's vector. Okay? Now here comes the fun part. If you do this correctly, now notice, do I have a ton of shading on there? Cross hatching? No, don't want to do that. Don't want to deal with that. I'm talking flat shading. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to do Object, Live Paint, Make. Object, Live Paint, Make. What this is going to do is something pretty amazing. That. It didn't do anything. Now you hit K on your keyboard. K, as in Kellogg's. Touch. Where's K? Oh, I'm not hitting it. There it is. So now I get this paint bucket tool. I'm going to open my swatches panel. I like to say swatches with a little more pizzazz than most. And I have my swatches panel selected. Now, look at my little paint bucket. You see that? I'm hitting my arrow keys. Everyone here, let's move it over here. Look at my swatches to the right of this. Do you see how up and down, you see how the little square is going through each of them? Okay? So what I can do, Mickey has famous yellow shoes. I hover over them, and I start painting. What? Who said this stuff was hard? I don't know. Mickey has a face on him that is always really hard for me to recreate. So I'm going to go to Open Swatch Library, and I'm going to go to Kids Stuff. I'm going to open those swatches. And I'm going to just make him have a terribly colored face. Oh, that's so bad. That's not it. Get in. That's not right at all. I can't do it. I can't. Telling me no. Do it. Too dark. But I'll fix it later. Don't worry. Calm down over there on the right side. You're like, ah. All right. Oh, this one wasn't closed all the way, so it looks like Mickey's going to have a totally green umbrella. I can even open my color swatch here. Darken this up. Let's see. I have shades, which is pretty cool. Darken those up. Mickey, you ever see the 4-Year-Old Virgin when he's like, I'm painting your pants blue? That's what I feel like right now. Painting your jacket blue. Mickey does have pants on. Thank goodness. And then water is blue. Is it hard to color your photos with my techniques? Nope. Is it time consuming? Sure. But do you have 6 people or 5 people? Yes. So the method is the same. You can have if one person is like, listen, I'm honest, I'm not very good at blah, blah, blah. You can do this. This is a very process oriented. So you give them a swatches panel and you say, here are the swatches for our project. Fill in the coloring book page. That alleviates you time to build the structure of the comic, the flow of the comic. That alleviates time for you guys to help with line quality or shading, which I'm going to get into in Illustrator. That's pretty cool. Let's say I want to add highlights and shadows. Good question.
What would you suggest about closing like the umbrella? How would you do that?
Before I live traced it, I take it to Photoshop or even here in Illustrator, or actually probably just in Photoshop, and I get a black paintbrush and go, boop. That's it. Normally it doesn't do that. I've probably painted this 24 times in my tenure of teaching, and this is the first time I did that. It's a map like the wrong thing. But overall, there. Send it to the back. It's there somewhere. Where's my face? Whatever, Mickey. How dare you. All right, Mickey's face is going to remain that color. Sometimes demos don't work. Again, I've done that a dozen times probably. What we want to do is add shadows and highlights. This will work. So let's say Mickey has a light cast from that umbrella or shadow casting on the top of his hat. This probably wouldn't be in full spectrum. So I'm going to go to my layers panel. I'm going to lock this layer, just like you would in Photoshop. In this case, it's just right next to our layer border. Inside that layer, by the way, remember, we have a group, we have all the paint little pieces and all that fun stuff. What was happening when Mickey's face was overpowered the rest of it, those layers shifted in a way that I really didn't feel like going in there and arranging them. If I sat there and took an extra 2 minutes, I would find that face layer and go, you're below the stroke layer. It just happened to not do that. So now that I have that on its own layer, remember layers in Illustrator are like groups. I do a new one, and I'm going to get zoomed in here, too much. And I'm going to get a couple tools. I can use my pencil tool or my pen tool. I get my pen tool because I'm comfortable with that. And I'm going to draw kind of a shape here. Okay, that looks really bad. That's okay. I'm going to work up on this, and I want to make that shape black. Make that shape black, Illustrator. Thank you. All right. So there's that one. I could use my pencil tool. Pencil tool is kind of funky. I dig it. If you don't have a tablet and you try to use your pencil tool, it's kind of like the pen tool, but like really loose. All right. So I'm going to get these. Same idea. Think Photoshop right now. If we want to make shadows, what blending mode do we use? Overlay or a darken mode, multiply or a darken. Okay. Overlay is more of a contrast mode. We could try it too. But I'm going to go immediately to transparency. So the transparency tab. Do you guys think I made you a video on this? Okay. Multiply, and I'm going to turn this down to like 20%. Oh, look at that. What if those were highlights? Which ones would I use? I'm going to have to do a little brighter just because of the color. So now I can have subtle highlights. If you have highlights, you have shadows and vice versa. But pretty cool, right? Let's say I like this one and I'm like, you know what, that will work perfectly. I'm not going to cheat. I am cheating. I'm not cheating. There's my comic book layout. Get my shape tool and do some placeholders. What's he doing? Is that magic? No. It's Photoshop. If I'm worried about how do I know how big to make those gutters? By layer, look, I have a layout. Okay, how do I get that picture in to this layout? Go to Illustrator, I'm done. That layer is locked here, so I'm going to unlock them. Copy, Command C or edit copy. Go to Photoshop, paste as a smart object. Remember, smart objects, we can still work on it. So if you're like, man, I didn't want his color jacket to be red, it's not, oh, too bad. You got to figure out a way to change it. It's no, I can go and edit that. Okay. Now, what I can do is arrange my layer order. I'll hit enter on this. And what have I noticed? What do I have as the background? A white box, right? Well, let's go into the smart object. Save. See if that fixed it. Yep. Get this. I can do a clipping mask. How do I do that clipping mask? I hold Alt. Oh, I hold Alt. These speak good. I held Alt in between the layers. No magic key, just hold down Option, click, release. So now, I know Mickey's going to be in this one. There we go. I know he's break the frame, then you don't do a flipping mask. But does this make sense? How this project can be very easy and less, all your projects, it's in the prep work. If I didn't grab a drawing that was nice and clean, that had really bold, sharp lines that were all closed where I wanted to color things in, I would not have the ability to drag and drop this in this one, would I? I still can mask this out. I still can get wild with this. I could either, this blue thing is a placeholder, that down. Let's say by all means you smudged up your drawing, you cannot fix it. One of your group members was meaning well, but they shaded the whole thing in and they're like, can't do anything with that, what am I gonna do? I need to make my own brush. We know how to make brushes in Photoshop, right? Illustrator has brushes. What do you think the shortcut is? D. And I need a new layer here. They're stroke brushes. So I don't want to fill, I just want the stroke. I'm going to draw. That looks all right. I have options to mess with this, one of which is this, my variable width profile. And when I do this, not a lot happens. Well, that stinks. Let me try to draw it again. That's all right. That doesn't look very dynamic. Again, I'm purposely doing this. I want you guys to see how you can achieve good line quality. If I make a shape, and I use that, that's better line quality, right? It's more variety. It has more rhythm. Maybe not for depending. It's dependent on your purpose, but that looks cool. That width profile changed that. So how do I get it to change my stroke? Well, my pen tool, I could draw things out with that. You notice with the pen tool, what's it do? Tapers it. Yeah, or they say taper. That's good. But I want it to be with my brush. So immediately I'm going to say, okay, there must be different types of brushes out there, just like Photoshop has 2 billion dozen brushes. 2 billion dozen. Write it down. It's on your final. So, oh, look at that, a chalk brush, a charcoal brush. Robert Rivers would be proud. Kevin Aaron would be like, all right. Okay, so I'm going to get, those are drawing professors for those of you who don't know. All right, I'm going to get this and I'm going to make this like 4. That doesn't look anything like charcoal. Crap. All right, so I'm going to teach you how to make your own brush. All right, it's very simple. What I do, and I have a video for this, but I make 2 ellipses. My ellipses are just fills. Take the stroke off. I'm going to take that ellipse and hold the Alt key just like in Photoshop. And what I want from these 2 ellipses, you see that center shape that looks like an eyeball? I want that shape. All right? So I'm going to take these and I'm going to go to something called Pathfinder. So in your notes, you're going to write Pathfinder. 2 shapes, go to Pathfinder, and I'm going to find the intersect mode. Is that button right there. Under shape modes, intersect. That means it takes the Venn diagram, so to speak, that we had, and intersects and gives us the center part. I dig this. I'm going to take this, I'm going to stretch it out slightly, shrink it in a little bit. Now, I'm going to open my brushes panel. Looks like little brushes. It says brushes. If you can't find that, window brushes. Same as Photoshop, okay? Take that brush, drag it into your brushes bin. I wish Photoshop, well, Photoshop kind of does this, but not as intuitively. I want to make it an art brush. We have calligraphy brushes, scatter brushes, art brushes, bristle brushes, and pattern brushes. Art brush. Just hit OK, don't worry about any of that. I'm going to hit delete. Bye-bye. That shape is done. Is it still in my brushes panel? Yeah. Now I'm going to get this brush. And look what happens. I get pretty good line quality. Stuff I couldn't get with that brush normally. It's kind of like Disney-esque, right? All right. But I didn't have that before, did I? It was cold. They figure out the color. Yeah, look at that palm tree. It's amazing. Then they'd say, okay, well, we got to make a leaf for the palm tree. Palm tree leaf. All right. Again, I have a video that will explain this in detail. Then I'm going to get my point brush. And I'm going to do this, which will make sense in a second. Rotate that around. Okay. I'm holding Alt or Option. That's in Photoshop too. Did you know that? If you draw a shape in Photoshop, you just hold your Alt key in. It duplicates on the fly. Pretty cool, right? With certain things, I mean, it depends. It has to be like a vector or a path or something like that. It can't be like, hey, I got Mickey Mouse, watch. You know? So I'm going to grab this, go to that Pathfinder tool, and I'm going to do, let's do divide. My white arrow, just like Photoshop, allows me to grab little itty bitty pieces. It gets better, hold on. Ooh, desperate. All right, and I brought mine during my secret envelope. It looks like I have like sensitive information. Is that roll sheet still going around? She has it good. And my other thing still up there? Thank you. All right. I feel bad. One of these days, the poor person who has to sit in the back corner. All right, I have a bunch of options here. I want to show you some of this stuff. You see my head here. Here is the easier way to do it. The tiger one. Okay, this is a normal size. See the size? See the 2 pieces of paper? I'll bring these up again next week too so we can actually look at them. Got it? 2 pieces of paper stapled. Here's the inside. You don't need to read it. It just makes it's clear that the artwork level. This is a 100% project. A project.